From the Grove, our paranormal, weird history, and word folklore podcast. I am your host, Wisteria, potion maker, meme brewer, herbalist, and mythology enthusiast. And today's guest is a really special one. It's your beloved druid, Wistmoor.
Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the Grove.
So tell us, Wistmoor, who are you trying to be today?
Who am I trying to be? Today, I am just a humble folklorist, and I'll be trying to shed light on the most fascinating corners of folklore.
Very nice, very intriguing. So let's get into the meat of this issue. Is it an issue? Do you feel like you can talk endless about it?
Yes, it's like those ancient alien episodes that just never seem to end. There's like 120 seasons of Ancient Aliens on the History Channel.
Still ongoing.
Yeah.
Good to know. We need to check them out, but you need to check us out. Okay, so my first question is, what inspired your pursuit of wonder?
Seeing that beautiful things were being made less and less. Excuse me. Marvels that evoke a sense of wonder sort of becoming a lost science, a lost art. And I'm naturally curious, so I seek out the mysterious and the strange as one source of that feeling or a sense of magic to dispel the mundane. I do have a much longer answer, and I'm excited to hear about today's topic, which is understanding folklore through the paranormal lens. A topic that is mysterious and evokes that sense of wonder that all my work tries to tap into.
Now that is really interesting. So you center your work around specific topics. My next question would be, what inspired you to center your research mostly around fae folk? Because I feel like that's your most researched topic, is it?
Yeah, I think it has been. We've done some recent dragon videos, but it always comes back to the fae folk. And the reason is that there's like a real breadth of fae folk as a class of entities. And that surprised me when I started to read more folklore and as I expanded the regions of where the folklore came from. So there are fairy dogs, there's fairy horses, there's even fae creatures that play the role of household elves, like the Lithuanian Aitveris, which looks like a small chicken dragon, but it's not like a fairy as you would think about it. It's like a creature.
Will we see the Lithuanian chicken dragon in some upcoming projects of yours, maybe even some cryptid comics?
Maybe, but the Aitveris is already in one of the dragon videos on the YouTube channel. And I've also always been into the paranormal and supernatural subjects, just as like a personal hobby of mine. But when I discovered fairies were at the heart of the paranormal and folklore, that's when I started focusing on them.
Makes sense. Now I want to ask you something. You focused your research on fae folk, but you could have, for example, chose another magical creature like the squonk. Do you have something against the squonk?
The squonk is very endearing because it's hard to
look at.
Yeah, the ugliest cryptid in existence, but it's still endearing. Whoa, I'm pulling cords. Hope I didn't pull anything out.
No, but you have it. Wistmore is leg hugging our cords. Yay. Was there a text or a story that gave you the idea that folklore was a paranormal and it was not just a fairy tale.
Yeah, there was a singular passage in Fairy and Folk Tales of the Irish Peasantry by W.B. Yeats that really started it all. And I got the quote here with me. All mystic and occult writers in all ages and countries have declared that behind the visible are chains on chains of conscious beings, who are not of heaven but of the earth, who have no inherent form but change according to their whim, or the mind that sees them. You cannot lift your hand without influencing and being influenced by hordes. The visible world is merely their skin. In dreams we go amongst them and play with them and combat with them. And that blew me away. I was like, what am I reading?
Yeah.
And so yeah, like ever since then, I have found other authors, each of them over 100 years old, that were folklorists. Another example is Walter Yealing Evans Wentz with the Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries. Also reinforced this idea as well. And Robert Kirk's The Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns, and Fairies. And so I sort of rediscovered this concept in folklore that isn't alive in any academic study of folklore today.
Mm-hmm. So when you're listing all these authors that are over 100 years old, most of them probably are dead.
Correct.
Yeah. And my question, not related to our interview, is do you find people that you can share all of these big ideas with, since all of these authors that have paved the way on your work have died?
I haven't found anybody contemporary to really share the ideas with,
He's lying. I'm here.
as in like other folklorists.
Sorry.
And also I'm putting these ideas into videos, and I have a Substack where I have like the scripts and all the writings that have come out of this research.
So we can find more of you out in the wild.
Yeah, Substack, look for Wistmoor, and also the YouTube channel under Wistmoor.
Nice. So then this leads into my next question. What is the biggest misconception about paranormal research? Because I feel like if you bring this topic up to anybody, you're gonna have some raised eyebrows.
Yeah, that's one thing where there's the ridicule factor by bringing up the paranormal in any sort of serious field. But the biggest misconception I think about paranormal research is that you can measure the immaterial with like ever more increasing esoteric or fine-tuned frequency gadgets, like on those ghost hunting shows. So in material science, you can't Ghostbusters your way into proving the paranormal, and that's just what you kind of see on reality TV today with those ghost hunting shows.
I see.
But the paranormal encounters will never be more than anecdotes to science, and anecdotes themselves can't be scientific proofs.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even think that CERN's research into God particles will end up answering any of these paranormal questions. And people will try to use all kinds of scientific sounding terms to explain the paranormal, like quantum mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
But that's really just a degradation of both science and paranormal research.
I see. So how do folklore and superstition influence our perception of the paranormal?
If anything, the current perceptions of the paranormal have broken away from folklore in most people's minds. And what I've discovered from these old scholars, Yeats, Wentz, Robert Kirk, I'm trying to reignite these ideas in the modern mind, and I see folklore as a oral history that's passed down experiences with the paranormal. And perhaps not every story has this element, but I find it a valuable lens to study folklore through, and I believe it produces deeper insight better than anything else that's currently being published.
I see. Through your research, I bet you find a lot of information, sometimes on the same topic but from different sources. How do you navigate contradictory information within the same myth or folklore? Did that ever happen?
Yeah, and I think it actually helps when the contradiction appears, is because you can use that to find the common threads and sort of triangulate um, the truth, or like the heart of the issue. And even in like purely historical accounts, you'll come across varying and contradictory information, but you can still piece together facts and account for differences in perspectives. But also, I think it's important not to get too deep into the weeds when you're studying folklore, because it's easy to lose sight of what's important about these stories, which is finding those common threads, understanding the mindset and real life experiences of the folk that spread the folklore and kept it alive, instead of treating the subject like a collection of old fantasy literature.
I see. That's very compelling. That means that common thread that you find is the most reliable piece of truth about the story that you can find.
It adds facets to the understanding. Um, yeah, I guess that's good enough.
So, in my understanding, your research stretches a bit towards history too and ancient cultures. Are there any fairies in ancient cultures, like ancient Greek culture or ancient Egyptians, something like that? Do we see early stories about such creatures in their culture?
Yeah, and I've actually recently come across something interesting with the ancient Greeks. They had this practice of marking gravestones with, "This is in memory of a person who is not buried here because they were taken away by nymphs." Cool stuff, yeah. And yeah, so you keep coming across this crazy, fascinating trivia the more you study, and finding these gems is what really keeps me going to try and discover more of them. But I have also done a video about the Greek kobolds. It's the prehistoric fairy you never knew. And the koboloi, which turned into kobold, became the basis of most of the fae folk you'll run into across Europe, like goblins, tommyknockers, and household elves. But, as you mentioned, even before the Greeks, the ancient Egyptians used the word, it's NTR, which you can pronounce as Netcher,
Mm-hmm.
which is their word to speak about the principal forces of the world around them. And Netcher evolved into the English word nature. But to the Egyptians, it could mean anything from the dead to minor gods to god kings, and also major gods like Anubis and Thoth. Um, and actually, in the Quran, it talks about how Allah created the jinn and humans, and that the jinn see human beings, but the human beings cannot see them.
Mm-hmm.
So it really goes back to the very beginning of humanity, and these entities have always been with us under various names. Um,
Now, I have my own theory. When you said that there are such graves that say that the people are not laying there dead and the nymphs stole them. Just let's think of an organization of people that are influential and have the funds to do whatever they please. Like, let's say, bring folklore and wonder back into the world, like the mafia. Let's think of the mafia. And they have some bodies to bury. What if they try to bring back the whole nymphs took this body away and it should never be found? Don't look for it, please. You should team up with the mafia to bring back the wonder and the fairy tales in the world so that people can believe into them like they used to back in the day. And they are benefits even for them too.
I think you have an interesting theory there, but making deals with the mafia probably is just as bad as making deals with fairies and demons.
Let's move on. So, I saw people use Ouija boards to contact spirits, demons, the demon world, whatever they can find, and rarely it's their grandma. Are there any ways to make the same kind of powerful connection with the Fey world? Like, are those fairy doors at the base of tree trunks or Fey offerings bridging the gap between the world in any way?
All right. There are a lot of examples in folklore about leaving gifts for the Fae, and many stories contain the same thread about being generous with them and earning their favor to bring luck and abundance to your household. But in these stories, you may not know, well, the person that does the offering may not know whether or not their luck is from fairy blessings or not, because it doesn't have that communication there. So that's one way of producing contact, is just by leaving gifts, fey gifts. As for modern contact, there are time slips, abduction, temporary dimensional shifts that you can choose to see as fairy doors or not. If anything, it's a fun exploration for entertainment or serious research, whatever you like. But as for like real communication, if we go back to that earlier Yeats quote, you are most likely to have communication with the Fae through dreams. It's just like you may have conversations with deceased relatives through dreams.
I see. So, in my understanding, it's whatever you can make out of those dreams. It's as deep as it goes with fairies, too. It's whatever you can make out of those fairy encounters, whether or not you leave offerings or not. And you don't know if they are the ones bringing you the luck, but it's best to tread carefully and just be nice to them. You never know.
Sound advice?
Yeah. You have brought a fox fairy into your home. Did you feel like it brought you luck? Is there a cloud of luck following you around?
Well, I certainly don't think my luck has been worsened.
Good enough answer. You know what's the most common representation of luck in folklore?
No.
Chaos. Boom.
Okay.
What kind of forces rule the fairy realm? Religion, politics? What is it that moves their world like it moves ours? What do they broadcast on their news?
Okay. So that is an interesting thought, and it is something that I've been trying to uncover. So honestly, I don't know. But I can kind of talk around it. So very little information comes back to us from the other side. I mentioned Robert Kirk earlier with the secret wealth of elves, fauns, and fairies. It is mentioned in his biography that he never died and he went over to the fairy realm, just like those ancient Greek gravestones.
Shocking.
And most often, when you pass over into their realm, you don't come back. But there are a few rare stories where someone comes back many years later without having aged, and they thought they were only gone moments. But still, this doesn't really lead to much bringing back much information. There's also a story about two green children in Suffolk, England. This was back in the 12th century. So the children, a boy and a girl with green skin, were found near a wolf pit by villagers. They spoke an unknown language and refused to eat until they found beans, and claimed to come from a place called St. Martin's Land. So the only piece of information from their memory is that the name of this place, and they said it was a place where the sun never shone, but it just sounds like they were in a hole. I don't know. So eventually, these children lost their green hue and became regular humans, and their memory was very hazy from the time before they were found. And then another complicating factor is you have fairy glamours that can erase your memory or implant false memories, and it's just one of those hard to unravel secrets about the fairy.
Something that is really puzzling for me is that from everything else they could have asked for, they asked for beans. Like, don't get me wrong, beans kind of slap sometimes, but beans, really?
Green beans.
Maybe they were the magical beans, like Jack and the Beanstalk.
Yeah.
You were looking for those kinds of beans, not jelly beans. So, with all these fairy tales kind of building up a sort of world, do you think that these fairy stories can coexist in the same fairy realm, or they are separate fairy realms? Like, from a world building perspective, do they share a common universe?
There are a lot of different names for fairy realms in folklore and in different regions. Sometimes it's an island, sometimes it is like under the ground. So it is possible that this could still be one unified dimension with various locations that have portals and whatnot. But like I mentioned earlier, these are we only have like very small clues to go on, but it does make for interesting digging.
I think it does make for interesting world building mechanics. And when it comes to world building, I feel like every creative person tries to come up with their own theory, their own world building rules. What world mechanics is Wistmoor Grove based on? Is world building like Tolkien did?
So Wistmore Grove is at first a Twitch live stream. So building this fictional grove from another dimension that opens portals to your world for entertainment. Really, this started out very chaotic and not even really thought out.
And continued very chaotic.
Yeah, so if anything, that's like the similarity with Fae is like just keeping it very chaotic. But it it is also to maintain a specific mood and keep things entertaining. But in terms of the name itself, Wistmore Grove was something I came up with for a wargaming project I was working on. There's this Sylvaneth army of tree spirits and Leshy type tree monsters. And this Sylvaneth concept is loosely based off of the wood elves from a previous version of the game, where these wood elves combined Celtic and indigenous American tribe motifs or styles. Um, and it kept on building from there because I would dig deeper into the fictional sources of those wood elves, and I found it in the writings of Lord Dunsany, and then I just kept on going deeper until I was actually in like ancient folklore.
I see. Something interesting that I just realized now is that you somehow never really planned for all these denizens of the grove to appear and to live. So well, I want to say peacefully, live together. Let's just say that. Because I showed up at some point, and then Tetro did, and then all the characters that we have, like Sprick and Phelan and everybody. But I feel like world building, it tends to be a lonely hobby, but in your case, all of these characters just kind of brought themselves in this world, and I feel like you did not put much effort into to bring them into this world. So I feel like it's a really compelling world if new characters just pop up with their own will.
Yeah, and it's really kind of been a sort of community building project because lots of people are involved in bringing different characters to life. And like I used to on stream draw fairy creatures with elements just given from chat. Say, hey, give it moose antlers, or I want it to have oyster mushrooms growing out of its face. And so it was just a fun community building project, making these wild creature illustrations.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to give you a piece of lore, forgotten lore of Wistmoor Grove. Back in the day when the Wildling series was coming to an end, there were two wildlings that I remember fondly. One of them was Marion the Rooster and Francis the Mouse Warrior. Do you remember them?
Yeah, I still have the sketches around here.
Nice, he remembers. This was a test.
And it was not Marion. It was the mouse character where I first used the Posca pens.
Francis.
Yeah, Francis. Francis got the first Posca pen experiment.
He was a special wildling. You should revive the wildling series at some point. Even bring back the Great Legendarium.
Yeah, we should do a retrospective and just break out all the illustrations.
Just for a quick information section, what is the Great Legendarium for people that don't know?
The Great Legendarium contained all of the wildlings that we collected from this group art project.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this big leather-bound sketchbook where I pen and inked the final version of the wildlings.
Mm-hmm. And did you intend from the beginning for this sketchbook to hold only these sketches, or did you want to make it like as a grimoire? What was your intention with it? Because it's a thick sketchbook.
I also wanted to put in some of my own concept sketches interspersed with them, so it was meant to be a sketchbook, but also have all types of creatures really filling it up.
I see. So it's an ongoing art project, just like Wistmoor Grove is.
Correct.
Now back to our fairy stories here. You know, fairies are known for lying, but some people say they are not lying and they are just not telling the entire truth. What moral compass keeps them from not actually lying? So do they have like a code of honor, something to keep them in check?
Well, fairies seem to enjoy games, word games, logic puzzles, and any sorts of twists of fate. But in order to play games, each party needs to follow the rules. So I think it comes down to knowing the rules of engagement of whichever game is being played. And that would be the code of the fairies, because if you cheat on a game, you don't have the joy of winning. Um, it just spoils the game itself. And they seem to prize this sort of entertainment above most other things. Um, so I think that would be the only thing. They probably will lie. They'll probably um, play word games as long as it's not out of bounds of the game rules itself.
Okay, that's a good answer. So, at some point, you did this video about rules that you should follow when you deal with fae folk. And you should not do a bunch of things, you should be wary of some things. Are you now advising our viewers to get into games with fairies?
No, I'm not advising. I'm just letting you know how it works with their personal ethics or code of honor when it comes to games.
Something really exciting that I just heard from another, what was it called? Like those people that you sent out on the field to broadcast news.
Yeah. Field reporters?
Yes. Some field reporter out in the field heard a crow, so you might have a friend expecting you after this interview.
Amazing.
He's just outside. Well, also, I feel like with your experience and just your overall knowledge around this topic, would you personally be able to get into a game with fairies?
It's kind of like, it still is kind of like going to a casino where they'll have the upper hand and they'll structure the game to have an upper hand. So your odds aren't in your favor. So no, I still wouldn't put myself in that situation. It's just good to be aware of this is how things work.
You know what is a hell-like concept? A casino actually run by fae folk.
But it might make for a good story.
Yeah, or like a good comic, for example. What do you say?
Perhaps.
For our gambling viewers out there. So, you talk about fairies like they are all bundled up in groups that you can basically name a few characteristics about them. You can define them in groups. Can you tell us the most common groups of fairies that you know?
The most common groups?
Yeah, that people just know.
So household elf would be what most people would encounter.
Mm-hmm.
And there are examples of household elves from Mexico to all across Europe. And there's even like similar ideas in Japanese folklore.
I know there are the water fairies, the water nymphs. Do they fall in a fairy group category?
I believe that would be called the Undines.
Okay. Like the Silky, was it?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So my next question would be, are there any clues of undiscovered fairies types yet to be witnessed or cataloged? Since we know all of these groups, do you think there's something out there in the great white somewhere?
Definitely, because fairies themselves are very mercurial creatures. Most of them have the ability to shapeshift as one of their supernatural abilities. And they can also implant thoughts and erase memories. So I'm surprised that there's enough consistency to create any kind of categories group of these creatures. But mostly I think it comes down to behavior. um, for the taxonomy of fairies. And so yeah, there's definitely uncategorized fairies out there to discover.
You know how people say that out of the ocean research that we did, we only categorized and thoroughly researched 5% of the ocean? What percentage do you think the Fae world is being discovered yet?
Probably much less.
2%? 1%?
Yeah, I'd say it's a much more vast world than ocean life.
So, to put it into perspective for our viewers, imagine all the oceans, all the bodies of water in the world, and how many wonders it holds. Now, do that times 10 and realize that we only discovered 5% of it. And there's so much out there that we don't know, and the forces that rule that place, and that puts it into perspective for you, don't you think?
Yeah, we're talking about whole other dimensions rather than just one terrain type ocean.
Exactly, but I feel like it's easier to grasp, even though the ocean is so hard to grasp for a lot of people.
Sure.
So, what is the most unique take on fairies you've ever heard?
Something that I've heard recently is, or uh, interesting, is the mixing between humans and fairies. So there's stories of examples of offspring become from fairies and humans, and that means that humans and fairies are somewhat closely related. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to have offspring. There's also stories about fairies becoming human, like the two green children from earlier. And so I guess this leads me to the most unique take I've heard is that you might be a fairy and not even know it.
So, you're just born that way?
Yeah. So that's some interesting content to sort of dive into. But one new unique take I want to start working on, and it may seem too far out there for most people, but I hope it's entertaining. It's the fairy ninja connection.
Oh, brother.
So yeah, I don't think anybody's really talked about that before.
If we were to talk about ninjas right now, I want to put my chaos out there in the world. Remember when we watched Big Trouble in Little China? Now imagine the same concept, but they are ninja fairies.
Yeah, there you go.
That would be a spin off that I want to direct. Want to take part in it, Wistmoor?
Yeah, we can start concepting.
Good. So now that we've gone through the most common types, the rarest kinds, the weirdest takes, when did the idea of Tinkerbell become the only thing that people imagine when fairies come up? Because I feel like that's ingrained in people's minds, and it's really hard to explain that some fairies are scary and just not how you'd expect them to look when everything that you can see behind your eyelids is Tinkerbell.
All right. So if you remember our last episode with Jim Brayfogle,
Yes.
the Victorian age was a point where a lot of these folklore creatures had their common perception changed, including the vampire, which is what we were talking about that in that episode. Because in the Victorian age, there was more fiction being produced and plays and operas, so it became they were adding more fictionalized content to it. And for the fairies, um, the earliest work where they had insect wings was the Fairy Mythology by Thomas Cately. And there were other Victorian, like, visual artists, like Joseph Noel Paton, Richard Dadd, John Anster Fitzgerald, who further cemented and shaped this idea of insect wings on fairies. And then we have another writer, George MacDonald, in 1858, produced Fantasies. And that was another one of these works where, yeah, I've got a quote. The women have only wings. Resplendent wings are they, wherein they can shroud themselves from head to foot in a panoply of glistening glory. So, at the time, artists were depicting angels with bird wings and demons with bat wings. And later, to differentiate these supernatural flying creatures from demons and angels, they gave fairies insect wings. Because not all fairies possessed the ability to fly, but they were plenty enough that had the ability to fly. And they were never really described with wings, just with the power of flight. So when it became time to paint them flying, they wanted to give them wings and needed a way to differentiate themselves, to differentiate the fairy from angels and demons.
So basically, by looking at the wings, you can kind of tell where the creature is coming from.
Sure. Yeah, that was sort of a symbolic shorthand that was developed during the Victorian era.
Now, can I throw a challenge at you? Can you try to come up with the best idea you have if you see a fairy, a gnome that has chicken wings? What is its source?
Well, they are shape-shifting creatures, and it's the paranormal and folklore is a very strange place. Even dragons can shapeshift, even wizards can shapeshift, even witches can shapeshift. So, going back to that Yeats quote, they change according to the mind of those that see them. You could even see them as an alien or a UFO.
I feel like the addition of chicken wings onto any kind of creature is very devilish. They are not that useful. You can fly far. You just flap them and you look stupid.
Well, don't tell that to the adverse, or else you might have all your crops burnt.
Shocking. So, what conspiracy theories are related to fairies? Do we have any?
Um, well, I think ancient alien, or also known as ancient astronaut theory, ties in well with the ideas of fairies because in that theory they're presented as extra dimensional entities with supernatural powers. So that's one place where fairies could be part of conspiracy. But there was one in 1917 with the Cottingley fairies, where the little girls shared photographs of themselves with fairies. Are you familiar with that one?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, so black and white pictures of children with fairies. And this one even involves the author of Sherlock Holmes, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, known for creating Sherlock Holmes, believed in the Cottingley fairies photographs. And he even went as far as to detail his reasons in an article he wrote for the Strand magazine in 1920. And he bought cameras for the girls, or there were two girls, so they could take more photos. But Sir Arthur Conan Doyle died before the truth came out about the Cottingley fairy hoax.
Mm-hmm.
So that was another conspiracy of fairies.
I see. I feel like there are more conspiracies out there, but only a really keen eye can make the connection between the conspiracy and if they have fairies involved in it, in the background. We have a Damshi in chat. Hello, Damshi. Hi.
Welcome, Damshi. Glad to have you.
We are doing a very serious interview, and I am interviewing Wistmoor, our favorite druid.
I don't know how serious we've been, but yeah, we're definitely in an interview.
So that qualifies it as a serious interview. We are only speaking facts here. From chicken wings to fairy ninjas, everything is facts. So I wanna segue into my favorite topic. You know that I'm a fairy of love, a creature of love. Can you tell us there are any love stories between fae and humans? What comes of them? Other than the best fairy tales ever? Are they similar stories to angels and humans? Do they create the same amount of chaos like that pairing does?
All right, so if you're familiar with Greek myths, the gods were having all types of love affairs with humans, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are plenty of stories of fairies seducing humans where a child is born. There's the story of Tam Lin from Scotland. I think it started out as a ballad, a song. And in this one, Tam Lin is the fairy. He's a seducer.
Mm-hmm.
Who seduces this human woman, and she does get pregnant, but the story doesn't really go beyond or up to her birth. So it's really just the love, them falling in love and overcoming obstacles. There's an Irish folktale, I think it started off as a poem, of Oisin and Niam of the golden hair.
Mm-hmm.
So this is reversed, where Niam is a fairy woman, and she seduces Oisin, and they go live in the fairy world. And they have 3 children. And it's quite a long story because it goes on, but the yeah, I don't know. But as for other examples, we have tragic love stories from Iceland about the Selkies,
Mm-hmm.
where a fisherman is at sea and he hears some sounds coming from a cave, and he gets in the cave and he finds discarded seal skins and takes one of them with him. Later, he returns to the cave and he finds a weeping young woman who happens to be the owner of this sealskin that he took home already.
Mm-hmm.
And he's trying to comfort her, and he takes her home with him. They marry and they have children. But one day, while that man is away fishing because he's a fisherman, the woman finds her sealskin and returns to the sea forever, leaving behind her family. So that's more of a tragic one. And there's lots of variations on this one too.
I see.
So yeah, there's all kinds of outcome. You got your tragic love stories. You've got your romance stories with like Tamlin, and yeah, so they cover like the whole gamut.
Mm-hmm. She says that depending on the rendition of fairy determines on whether they exist. Is that true?
Um,
I'll let you think about it. I remembered of something about fairy stories, especially like the loved ones. You read to me a story from Dunsany, was it? About that girl that fell in love with a bishop. Was it a bishop? Was it? It was in church.
yeah. Yeah, so it was a fictional Dunsany one. He really enjoyed folklore, and he started making up his own stories, which were really well written. But I guess if you're talking about, it depends on the rendition. Yeah, there's lots of fictional, obviously fictional stories just made for entertainment. Um, and that's what we start seeing mostly after the Victorian era is fiction. But if you're going for folklore, that also still exists today because people are still having these fairy encounters. It's just you have to do more digging to find them.
I see. Don't you clarify here? Says like fairies such as Tinkerbell don't exist, right?
Cool, cool. I got on your wavelength.
Yes. We just discussed the Tinkerbell theories and how the Tinkerbell image came to be. So, in my opinion, the spot on small sexy fairy is not a thing, but then people need to make them marketable. So,
Well, it can be a thing. It just doesn't describe all of fairies because you still have your pixies and your sprites. And they weren't necessarily always having these insect wings. But yeah, so Tinkerbell has become synonymous with fairy, and people always think of Tinkerbell as what fairies have to be. But it's when you actually get into the old folklore before the fictionalization of them, um, and also the Disneyfication of fairy tales and the watering down of fairy tales, it's a lot more interesting before that time.
Disneyfication became my favorite word. Sounds so, menacing. You mentioned the story about a boy fae folk that fell in love with a woman, and the story was not exactly complete. It was the Tamlin one.
Yeah.
Yes. So he is the fae folk boy. We can do like a twist to that emo girl song and just say, "I fell in love with the fae folk boy." We can re-record it, find an audience for it. Or do you still prefer the emo girl?
Yeah, I'll let you run with that one.
It is very menacing if Disney wants to put their spin on your stories. Can you imagine just in a hellish world, Disney putting their spin onto Wistmoor Grove, how it will look?
Well, I don't think Disney will be buying Wistmore Grove anytime soon, and maybe one day Wistmore Grove can out eclipse whatever is left of Disney.
Wistmoor Grove World. When instead of buying Mickey pretzels, you buy Wistmoor antlers.
Yeah, so I don't really have as high hopes for Wistmore Grove and its characters, but really I would love to see the original interpretation of folklore become as big as Ancient Aliens.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, so I think there is definitely room for growth with this whole idea aside from Wismar Grove.
Yeah. Domshi gives you a more sound idea about how to make Wistmore Grove more like Disney, and it's many ads and paywalls.
And that's the exact opposite of what we've been doing.
Yeah, we dropped Twitch affiliate because we were bothered by the ads that would pop up in the middle of an amazing idea.
Yeah, and we also stopped taking membership for the Ko-Fi. So
And just putting out content at a slower pace, to be honest, but still the same quality of content. We are still doing the same things, but we just stopped for a while with the memberships to offer you the same quality.
amazing, right?
Amazing. The gift that keeps on giving. And why we do that, you may ask? because we care about our viewers and we care about the quality, and we also do it because it's fun.
Yeah, trying to bring fun and wonder to the world around us.
Yes. So now I'm curious about something. I have heard a recent story from the fairy census about a fae encounter that is more of recent times. And the little gnome fairy described there, I distinctively remember having it described with short pants, like cargo pants, with pockets and everything. And now I wonder, did you notice in your research if the clothes or fashion that fairies are described in changed with the time period that the story was recorded?
Yeah, there's a lot of that. Usually, when a fairy creature or being is encountered, they're in an outmoded fashion or an old fashion. Um, and nowadays, fashion does change very fast, and fairies have always been sort of out of time. So I guess it's not as big of a thing when you go back to medieval times because fashions weren't really changing over hundreds of years as much, especially for like the regular folk.
Mm-hmm.
So you may not be able to tell that they're in 100-year-old outfit style because that's still the style that's in for the day back in medieval times. But yeah, usually they're in older fashions if fashions are changing.
So you would say they would be sporting some peasant clothes, not the puffy pants, all kinds of embroidered vests that nobility would wear.
Well, there is fairy nobility, but I think what most people run into are the regular kind of household elves. Um, I haven't come across any recent encounters with fairy nobility, um, but that doesn't mean that it's not out there.
A royal sense of fashion, indeed. Now back to how believable you are as a folklorist. Oh, you're really believable. You summoned a four tokens.
Toki! Welcome, Toki.
A four toki. Yes, you've been summoned. We are talking about fairies, about fae folk, about the credibility of a folklorist. Why do you feel like paranormal encounters of, let's say, ghosts and demons tend to make people have a more serious tone when talking about them compared to an encounter with a fairy or a gnome? Is it a certain type of human personality that is better suited to be in contact with such fae folk?
All right, so let me address the first question. Um, we're back to that ridicule factor. I think is a result of the Disneyfication and watering down of fairy tales. There you go. You love that word. Um, so this even comes up in folklorist academia, where they don't want to be laughed at. They want to be taken seriously. And that's why the paranormal isn't discussed as much in academia.
Mm-hmm.
So they stick with the ethnographic, the like the written down words, and they study the words, and they most often sort of lose sight of the folk that were experiencing it, that had the stories and that kept it alive. And I think that's even what's the most interesting part about the folklore is the perspective of these folk. Um, yeah, so the whole Tam Lin thing too was a ballad. Oshin and Yam was a poem. So these weren't kids' stories, and even Beowulf, which you might read in high school, is a raucous adventure epic with where the hero kills a dragon. So these stories have been entertaining people throughout time, um, like on long winter's nights, and it wasn't just for kids. And I think that's what adds to the ridicule factor is because today it's believed that fairy tales are for kids.
Hmm. And do you feel like ghost stories or demon stories or encounter of such entities are more believable?
Yeah, I think people are still having those experiences. They might think that you're crazy, but there's a wealth of examples of those stories still happening. And the whole idea of the ghost story has been separated from fairy tales and folklore and sort of gone into poltergeist and haunting and horror. But in folklore, they they were just part of it because there was always this fuzzy line between the realm of the dead and fairies. It also kind of goes back to the Egyptian word nature, where it could mean the dead or it could mean like the minor gods when they're referring to these principal powers. So it seems like these ideas have always been mingling.
I see. So you can basically split the population into people that have this perception, are able to perceive ghosts and demons, and the ones that have fairy and gnome encounters and just these fae folk encounters. Uh, are there any predispositions, personality that is better suited to contact the fae folk and to be in contact with them rather than to see it as a ghost encounter or a demonic encounter? Or is it just in the eye of the beholder?
All right. So if you want to talk about the personality types where things tend to go well, I would say that would be somebody who's generous because of that whole idea of like the fairy favor and giving them gifts, and in return, they bring you abundance of crops or luck. Um, and there's some really interesting stuff in like Welsh and German folklore where they respect like warriors and strong bodied people because the Fae themselves are more of a fragile kind of creature. And in those Welsh and German myths, they actually like hire humans to do their fightings to fight like monsters in the fairy realm and dragons and giants or even other fairies. And in some of these, there was this one from Wentz where he talks about there's these two Fey armies, and whichever side had the most humans in the armies would win because they're the ones that have strength.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be one way that a fairy might come to you, and I don't know if it would be a better outcome, but that would be one where they might seek out a person. Um, but otherwise, I would just go with generous and kind, because even the Ait Varus, which was this dragon chicken, that could bestow luck and bring crop abundance, or if you treated it poorly, would burn your crops down or have like a house fire. So, yeah, that's probably the best way to go. Generous and kind.
So, what would you say would be your personality? Do you think you are more inclined to have fae folk encounters rather than ghost paranormal encounters?
Well, if you do have Fey folk encounters, you might not even know it because they often are in the shapes of animals. So if you're like feeding stray cats or you're feeding uh, neighborhood birds, you could be showing your generosity to a fae folk just by taking care of the wildlife around your domicile.
And we are about to end this beautiful interview, but I want to do a bit of like a relationship vibe check. We have an orange cat in our backyard. We call it the orange jerk because he's sitting in Wistmoor's plants. Do you think he might be the fae folk encounter that you're trying to ruin every day?
Well, yes, I do try to chase off the jerk because he's killing garden plants. But yeah, he probably could get back at me for territorial disputes.
So, in that sense, you never thought of him as any sort of prankster fae?
Yeah, he certainly could be, but I am taking care of birds, and I'd much rather have the crows around than the cat that takes a dump in my garden.
The plot twist of the story would be that the orange jerk is, the one in contact with ravens, and the orange jerk told the ravens to not come by.
Well, they're definitely afraid. The ravens are afraid of the cats.
Because the cats told the ravens, don't come here, he's gonna shoo you away.
No, they know I'm good, and I've helped feed the raven babies.
I'm guilt tripping Wistmoor into petting the orange cat. I don't feel bad for it if anyone is wondering. So that was a beautiful interview. It ended in Wisteria guilt tripping Wistmoor as always. Thank you for sticking with us. Thank you for dropping in chat, Domshi, for tokens, for everybody who's listening right now and later. Do you want to say anything for the closing?
Yeah, so this is our season finale for season 1 of It Came from the Grove.
Whoa.
And we'll be starting season 2, hoping to get some big guests for this new season.
And middle-sized guests. Just all the raven friends to chase off the cat. No, just get all the raven friends, okay?
And we do have an eagle that I think is intimidating the cats.
Yeah, he was doing circles above our house yesterday. I saw it.
Yeah. Or a hawk. It might be a hawk. But yeah, that hawk, it can be very dangerous.
It can snatch your bunnies. It can snatch your kids. It can snatch your fairy. So that will be all for today, folks. I think we covered this topic quite well, and we still have lots to talk about.
Yeah, we haven't depleted anything.
Amazing. So with that, I think we can catch you out in the wild.